If you are 1 to 3 years into your lifting journey, I can guarantee you are making one of these mistakes that I personally wish I would have fixed sooner. So today we are going to go through those mistakes. Before we get into that, brief background of who I am a fitness coach. I've been coaching for about 6 years now, and I work with women who are high performers who want to take their fitness journey to the next level. They've kind of already gone through that process of getting into the gym. You know, they're pretty consistent, but they're not as consistent as they would like themselves to be because they view themselves as high performers. They view themselves as disciplined, but in their fitness journey, they seem to have a struggle getting consistent because they don't have the clarity, and so they don't have the confidence in their process, and therefore consistency becomes an issue. So that's who I work with, that's what I do. Now for me personally, I hit a plateau around 2 to 3 years into my journey. So I've kind of experienced this phase of not knowing what to do and diving headfirst into the trial and error of it all. So as you can see with the transformation, I had actually achieved a pretty decent physique at that point. But again, I had hit a plateau and I couldn't get away with the same level of strategy that I was once using, which if I'm being honest, it wasn't really much of a strategy. I was training 6 days a week. I was doing as much as I could. I was writing down my training plan in my phone notes or just buying online workout programs. And at this point, I was super frustrated because I was doing everything that I could. And I actually went out and got my personal training certification for my own knowledge. I didn't even plan to become a coach. I didn't plan to become a personal trainer. And in fact, it was the last thing on my radar. But in that process of getting my personal training certification, I realized that this wasn't filling the gaps of what I didn't know. I personally wanted to know how to better do things and how to put everything together with all of this endless research that I was doing. But it just didn't put it all together like I thought it would. And so that led me to the era of trial and error, doing everything that I could personally to make sense of all the information and to put it together into a system that would work. Now, the reason this plateau took such a toll on me and frustrated me to no end, and let me know if you relate to this, because I see myself as someone who is very ambitious, consistent, and can be disciplined. If you tell me what to do, I'm gonna do it. So it was the not knowing what to do that really led me to feeling down on myself, because as a high performing person my whole life, I felt like I derived my value from being able to do those things, from being able to accomplish, from being able to perform. So with the inconsistency, I would beat myself up, and then it would lead to this endless cycle of hunkering down and trying again, working up all the courage to do it, trying it, having it not work, falling off, and then repeating the cycle again. And this was because I didn't have what I called 3 C's: clarity, confidence, and consistency. So when you have clarity in your process and you know what works, you have a system in front of you that works, it then leads to you being a lot more confident in your process. 10 times more confident than if you were just throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping it sticks, which is then what leads to the consistency. Your clarity and your confidence in your process leads to your ability to be consistent when things aren't moving super fast. You can still keep going, you can still keep putting in the effort because you know that no matter what, this is going to work, and that leads to consistency. You're not going to be consistent at something that you don't believe is actually going to work. So let's get into it. I'll break down the top 5 things I did wrong so you can skip all the wasted time and start seeing results faster. Number 1 is chasing fatigue. The thing is that it's not about how much you do, it's how well you do it. So a lot of people will be chasing fatigue in the gym through feeling a pump or getting sore. But the reality is none of those things lead to muscle growth. And in fact, it can actually inhibit muscle growth because you can't recover as well when you are highly fatigued. So really intelligent training programming will actually limit the amount of fatigue that you're experiencing. And if you were using fatigue as a measurement to how productive your workout was, that's actually completely backwards. So we need to shift away from using fatigue as a metric. Like I said, what you actually want to be doing is limiting fatigue through proper programming, making sure you're not doing way too many sets, way too many exercises, and way too many intensity techniques like drop sets, supersets, and things like that. This leads me to number 2. Overtraining is just as bad as undertraining. So I was the person who was working out 6 to 7 days a week. There was a time where I was doing 2 a days, and this brought me to a point where I really hit my plateau because I was doing so much and I was creating so much fatigue that I couldn't recover from it. So the issue here is that most people overtrain in the wrong way and undertrain in the wrong way. They overtrain in the sense that they're doing too much volume, but they undertrain in a sense that they're not using enough intensity. But when it comes to the intensity, this is where people get really confused. They think intensity means sweating, how cardiovascularly fatigued they are they breathing heavy, did it feel really difficult? And that's not a great measurement to use for intensity. What I mean by intensity is how far away from technical failure are you training and how consistently are you doing that? Most beginners who have never learned how to gauge their reps in reserve at the end of a set are actually training 6 to 8 reps away from failure. Now, to effectively grow muscle, you need to be in the 1 to 3 reps away from failure range. So when you hit the end of a set, you should be 1 to 3 reps away from technical failure, where you could not complete another rep under the same conditions, meaning you didn't change your form or the technique or, using body momentum to lift the weight up. So that's what I mean by intensity. You really need to learn your reps in reserve, and this is what's going to allow you to increase your intensity while decreasing your volume and getting the most out of your workout. Okay, now let's move on to number 3, which I know is something a lot of people do: program hopping. The reason people program hop is because they don't understand the actual drivers behind what causes results. So they just want to hop from program to program because they are uncertain of what's going to drive progress, and then that creates a very unsettled behavior in jumping from thing to thing. I am settled into the way that I do things, and I keep it very consistent, and I can be calm in that because I can trust the process knowing that it works. So understanding what actually causes muscle growth will be the driver behind all of the decisions that you make in your programming and with how you train. So the biggest thing you should be looking for is progressive overload occurring in your training. Now, the only way to know that is if you have standardized your training and you also have a program that has periodization within it. So it allows you to naturally make progressive overload happen by the way that it's intelligently programmed. So you're adding reps or you're adding weight each week under the same conditions, meaning you're not changing your form, your technique, your tempo, or anything about the movement or the exercises so that you can add reps and or weight. So that should be occurring if you are building muscle and strength. But if you have to change the way that you do the movement just to get the extra rep or just to get the extra weight, you probably aren't progressively overloading, which means there's an issue with your programming. Another thing that causes muscle growth, which is the most important thing, is mechanical tension. Now, this is not to be confused with time under tension. Time under tension does not build more muscle tissue, okay? Time under tension often actually creates more fatigue, especially on the eccentric. If you are just doing super slow, more than 5-second eccentrics, you're causing so much muscle damage that it's hard to recover from, which again inhibits the process of muscle growth. Now, when it comes to mechanical tension, this is the amount of tension that the muscle experiences under load when it's contracting. So this means applying force through a full range of motion. Now, the biggest mistake people make with this is thinking that more and more muscle damage is going to do them good for muscle growth, and that's not the case, right? A lot of people go into the gym and they just beat themselves into the ground thinking that, well, the more I do, the more I'm going to get out, because in every other area of my life, that's how it's done. But when it comes to muscle growth, there is a sweet spot where you don't do too much. You also don't want to fall short of doing enough. So again, this is where establishing principles of muscle growth is really important, because this will drive all of the decisions that you make and how you train and how you program. Now, if you want me to do a separate video on principles of muscle growth, just let me know in the comments below. Going into mistake number 4 is not phasing my training and nutrition. Now, I didn't really understand this until I actually sat down and mapped out an entire phase training program, but not only my training program, my nutrition. And this is the piece a lot of people miss. In order to get to your overall goals physique-wise and health-wise, you need to have phased out nutrition that is focused towards different goals at different times for different lengths of time, because you can't lose body fat and build muscle for the rest of your life at the same time. You do need to have phases where you're focused on each thing, and they are specifically designed to get that outcome. And there's a way to do things intelligently, right? Doing a calorie deficit where you just drop 500 calories for 6 months probably isn't the way to go. You want to do that in a phased approach and have it laid out for you. So the details of each of those things is important. So the bare minimum for a proper training program is ensuring that it's phased out. So maybe a 5 to 6 week cycle where you know what variables are staying the same and what variables are changing in order to drive the outcomes that you want. So things like your exercises, they should stay the same for a minimum of 5 to 6 weeks so that you can progressively overload within that training phase. And as we know, progressive overload means you are adding a rep and or weight under the same conditions as the previous session. Now, this also allows you to have a method of progression. So are you going to be adding reps? Are you going to be adding weight? And how are those things going to be fluctuating throughout the training phase? So are you going to be doing 6 reps and then 7 next week? Are you going to then decrease to 6 reps and increase the weight, and then the following week increase again in the reps with that same weight? There's many different ways to program, but that's just a brief example of how you should be phasing your training to allow for progressive overload to happen. And same thing with nutrition. If you're someone who has, 20 pounds to lose, you're probably not going to go into a calorie surplus right now, right? So you need to phase out a maintenance phase where you're focusing on your health so that you can get your metabolic health in check, meaning that it makes it easier to then go into that calorie deficit. Then maybe you do reverse diet coming out, make sure you have the length of time in there. What kind of calories are you going to be adjusting? How are you going to do that? How's your cardio adjusting? What are we focusing on from a health standpoint? All of those things should be included in your phased nutrition plan. Mistake number 5 was not eating enough. And here's the reality. This was just me staying in the middle and being wishy-washy because I didn't want to commit fully to either side of the spectrum. And if you are doing this, you're not eating enough and you're kind of being in the middle, you're like maintaining, but you're not actually tracking your food consistently, but you call it maintaining, you are 100% gaining and losing the same 5 pounds every year. and you will stay this way until you commit. I went from eating 11 to 1200 calories a day to eating now 18 to 1900 calories a day to maintain, which means I can build muscle while eating 1800 to 1900 calories. And I can very easily lose body fat going into a deficit without absolutely starving myself, because my maintenance is a lot higher than it used to be. So you have to go through that process of eating more, but in a very controlled way. The mistake a lot of people make is when they go and eat more, they just start eating more and all of a sudden they start blowing up. They feel really watery, they're holding a lot of water, they feel like they have a ton of body fat that they put on. That is not necessary to build muscle tissue, and that also is not necessary for you to start eating more. If you do it the right way, those undesirable outcomes will not happen. But plain and simple, not eating enough will not get you where you want to go, especially when it comes to building muscle tissue. The purpose of building muscle tissue is not only for the looks of it, but also to increase your maintenance calories, like I mentioned before. It makes your life a whole lot easier, especially when it comes to going into a calorie deficit, because you have more room to do that. Your food is really what fuels your body to build the muscle tissue after you have created that stimulus in the gym. You are not building the muscle in the gym, you are creating the stimulus for muscle to grow, and you need to follow that up with the proper amounts of protein and calories on the other end. Mistake number 6 was not increasing my maintenance calories soon enough. This should be your main focus first, period. I already mentioned before why this is so important, but I'm going to dive into how you can actually do this. Number 1 is improving your metabolic function. So this means eating good quality foods, reducing stress, prioritizing protein intake, and optimizing sleep quality. The better metabolic function you have, the easier time you're going to have losing weight or building muscle, because the processes within your body are functioning optimally. The second way that you can increase your maintenance calories is increasing the training quality and intensity that you are using. The piece that most people miss is they don't realize that training is the driver behind everything. So if you have a shitty training program, it does not matter how much you eat, that will go to body fat if you are not training effectively. If you are not managing your fatigue well through a proper training program, you won't be able to build muscle as effectively, which, as we know, muscle tissue contributes to a higher maintenance calories because your body burns more at rest when it has more muscle tissue. So it doesn't matter how much you are eating, how much protein you're eating. If your training is not strategically systemized and built out with proper hypertrophy principles, you will not get the same outcomes as someone who does. And third is building muscle tissue, which is going to happen through the processes that we just talked about. But again, building muscle tissue allows you to have that higher maintenance calories. Another reason this is so important is because if you want to eat more than 1400 calories without looking bloated and blowing up and holding a bunch of water, you want to work on increasing your metabolism or your maintenance calories by gaining muscle and eating at maintenance calories or slightly above with a consistent amount of protein intake. Now, obviously the goal for this is for you to put it all into one system that functions smoothly. But if you're serious about making long-term gains, avoiding these mistakes is the first thing that you should do and will put you way ahead of the curve. But this is about so much more than just the physical outcome. It's a form of pursuing more for yourself and who you become in the process. Resilient, confident, proud of yourself, which you can't do if you're not making progress because you constantly feel like you're failing. But what if it's not your discipline that's the issue? It's actually your system. It's your strategy. Right now, our spring enrollment for coaching is open before we close spots for the next few months while we make some very big upgrades to the program. Now with that, our prices will be going up permanently. So if you want to jump on now before things change, go ahead and hit the link in the caption below to submit an application. There's no commitment yet. We'll have a conversation, see if it's a good fit, talk about your goals, and then go from there. Now, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe for more educational videos like this. Leave a comment if you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one.